At the most lavish wedding of the year, a jealous guest hurled scalding coffee at the bride's face in front of 300 horrified witnesses. Everyone expected the billionaire groom to explode in rage. Instead, what he did next became the most talked about moment in social history. This is that story. Before we dive into this unbelievable true story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't believe how this situation unfolds, and trust me, you don't want to miss the ending. Now let's get into it. The California coastline stretched endlessly beyond the pristine white tents, where crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows across the lawn. 300 guests had gathered at one of the most exclusive venues in the country, and the air buzzed with the kind of excitement that only comes with witnessing something truly extraordinary. This wasn't just another wedding of the wealthy elite. This was the union of Thomas Hartford, the self-made billionaire who had revolutionized the tech industry before turning 35, and Isabel Monroe, the woman who had somehow captured his guarded heart in a way no one thought possible. Isabel wasn't what anyone expected. She didn't come from money or power. She had spent the last 6 years working as a nurse in charity hospitals, dedicating her life to helping people who couldn't afford basic health care. She wore kindness like other women wore designer labels, and her smile had a way of making everyone around her feel seen and valued. When Thomas first met her at a hospital fundraiser 2 years ago, he had been impressed by her complete indifference to his wealth. She didn't recognize him, didn't know his net worth, didn't care about his investments or his influence. She only cared about whether he was willing to help fund a new children's wing at the hospital where she worked. That authenticity had drawn Thomas in like nothing else ever had. He was used to people wanting something from him, used to relationships built on transactions rather than genuine connection. But Isabel was different. She challenged him, inspired him, and loved him for the man he was underneath all the billions. Their engagement had surprised everyone in Thomas's social circle, but those who truly knew him understood. He had finally found something real. The ceremony itself had been breathtaking. Isabel walked down the aisle in a gown that seemed to float around her like sea foam, delicate lace catching the light with every step. Her father, a retired firefighter with tears streaming down his weathered face, held her arm with trembling pride. Thomas stood at the altar watching her approach, and for a man known for his steel composure in billion-dollar negotiations, he couldn't stop the tears that rolled down his cheeks. When they exchanged vows, his voice cracked with emotion as he promised to honor the woman who had shown him what true wealth really meant. But not everyone in attendance was celebrating. Seated near the back, dressed in a crimson gown that screamed for attention at an event where she should have faded into the background, sat Veronica Ashford. She came from old money, the kind that stretched back generations and came with a sense of entitlement that no amount of wealth could buy. 3 years ago, she and Thomas had dated briefly, a relationship that had been more about convenience and social expectations than actual connection. When Thomas ended things, Veronica had smiled graciously in public while seething privately. She had always assumed he would come back. Men like Thomas didn't leave women like her, except he had. And worse, he had fallen in love with someone Veronica considered beneath them both, a nurse, someone who worked for a living, someone without the right last name or the right connections. For months, Veronica had watched from the sidelines as Thomas and Isabel's relationship blossomed into something she couldn't understand or accept. She had whispered to mutual friends, planting seeds of doubt. Called Isabel a gold digger who was manipulating Thomas. Suggested the relationship wouldn't last once Isabel got bored of playing poor. But Thomas hadn't listened. And now here they were, married, and Veronica's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her champagne glass. The reception began with all the elegance expected of such an event. A live orchestra played as servers in crisp uniforms glided between tables carrying trays of delicacies that cost more per bite than most people spent on entire meals. Isabel moved through the crowd with natural grace, stopping to talk with elderly relatives, kneeling down to chat with the children of Thomas's business partners, making sure every single person felt welcomed and appreciated. This was who she was at her core, a woman who saw people, really saw them, regardless of their status or importance. She made her way toward the back tables, determined to thank even the most distant acquaintances for coming. That's when she approached Veronica's table. Isabel knew the history, knew that Veronica and Thomas had dated, but she carried no jealousy or insecurity about it. In her mind, the past was the past, and she wanted to start this new chapter of her life with grace and maturity. She smiled warmly at Veronica, her voice genuine as she said, "Thank you so much for being here today. It means a lot to both of us that you came to celebrate with us." What happened next occurred so fast that most guests didn't process it until it was already over. Veronica stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her face was flushed from champagne and fury, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. A server had just placed a fresh pot of coffee on the nearby beverage station, steam still rising from its contents. Veronica grabbed it with both hands and, before anyone could react, before anyone could shout a warning or pull Isabel away, she lifted the pot and poured the scalding liquid directly onto Isabel's face and down the front of her wedding dress. The scream that tore from Isabel's throat was pure agony. The entire reception fell into shocked silence, 300 people frozen in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Isabel's hands flew to her face as coffee dripped from her hair, her skin turning angry red where the hot liquid had made contact. Veronica stood there, empty pot still in her hands, breathing hard, and then she screamed the words that had been poisoning her thoughts for months. "You don't deserve him. You're nobody. You're just a pathetic nurse who got lucky." Chaos erupted. Guests jumped from their seats. Women gasped and men shouted. Security personnel stationed around the perimeter began moving toward Veronica. Thomas's parents, Margaret and William Hartford, rose from the head table, their faces masks of horror and fury. But every eye in that tent was on Thomas himself, waiting to see how the billionaire groom would respond to someone assaulting his bride on their wedding day. Everyone expected an explosion. Thomas Hartford was known in business circles as a man who dismantled competitors without mercy, who could destroy entire companies with a single strategic move. He had the resources to ruin Veronica's life in 1,000 different ways. He could have her arrested, sued, socially obliterated. The guests held their breath, waiting for the rage, the shouting, the dramatic response that such a violation deserved. But Thomas didn't explode. He didn't yell or threaten. Instead, he raised one hand calmly, stopping security in their tracks. The gesture was so controlled, so deliberate, that it somehow commanded more attention than any outburst could have. He walked across the reception area with measured steps, his face unreadable, and went directly to Isabel. Without a word, he removed his suit jacket and wrapped it gently around her shoulders. He leaned close and whispered something in her ear that no one else could hear, then signaled to his personal assistant. Within seconds, medical staff who had been on standby for any emergency were escorting Isabel away to receive proper treatment for her burns. Only then did Thomas turn to face Veronica. The silence in the tent was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the grass outside. Thomas's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but carried clearly to every corner of the space. "Thank you, Veronica," he said, and the words were so unexpected that confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Veronica's expression shifted from defiant rage to uncertainty. She hadn't expected gratitude. Thomas continued, his tone still calm, still measured. "Thank you for showing everyone here your true character. Thank you for proving beyond any doubt the kind of person you really are." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I've known for months that you've been spreading lies about Isabel, calling her a gold digger to our mutual friends, suggesting she was manipulating me, trying to sabotage our relationship at every turn." Veronica's face went pale. Around the tent, guests began pulling out their phones, whispering to each other, the story already being texted and shared across social networks. Thomas gestured to his assistant again, and suddenly the large screens that had been displaying photos from the ceremony flickered to life with new content. Text messages appeared, emails, screenshots of conversations that Veronica had thought were private. The crowd leaned forward, reading the evidence of Veronica's campaign against Isabel. Messages where Veronica mocked Isabel's background, called her trailer trash, who got lucky, suggested she was probably pregnant, entrapping Thomas. Emails to wedding vendors, attempting to bribe them into sabotaging the arrangements. Text exchanges with a tabloid journalist where Veronica tried to plant false stories about Isabel having affairs. The documentary evidence of months of cruelty and manipulation, all displayed in high definition for 300 witnesses to see. Gasps and whispers grew louder as people read. Veronica's friends at her table physically moved their chairs away from her, creating visible distance. Her face had gone from pale to gray, her hands trembling. The empty coffee pot slipped from her fingers and clattered on the floor. Thomas let the silence stretch, let every person in that tent fully absorb what they were seeing, and then he spoke again. "I had this evidence for weeks," he said. "I could have exposed you any time, could have cut you out of our social circle, made sure you were never invited to another significant event. But I chose not to. I wanted to believe that you would find it in yourself to be decent, to show up today and be gracious, even if you disagreed with my choice. I gave you every opportunity to prove me wrong about what I suspected you'd become." He paused, his eyes never leaving Veronica's face. "And instead, you proved me exactly right." The weight of those words seemed to physically press down on Veronica's shoulders. She looked around desperately, seeking support or sympathy from the crowd, but found only judgment and disgust reflected back at her. Thomas wasn't finished. "Here's what's going to happen now, Veronica. I'm not going to have you arrested, though I certainly could. I'm not going to sue you, though my lawyers are eager to. Instead, I'm going to give you a choice, right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses." He stepped closer, his voice still maddeningly calm. "Option 1, you leave immediately. Security will escort you out, and you'll face the social consequences of what you've done here today. Everyone in this tent will remember you as the woman who assaulted a bride on her wedding day out of jealousy and spite. Your reputation, your social standing, everything you value will be questioned by everyone who matters in your world." The threat hung in the air like a blade, but Thomas wasn't done. "Option 2, you stay. You stand up in front of every person here and genuinely apologize to Isabel. And then you write a check for $500,000 to the burn victims charity where Isabel volunteers. The donation will be in her name. You'll turn this moment of cruelty into something that actually helps people who are suffering. You'll take your ugliness and transform it into something beautiful." The tent erupted in murmurs. $500,000 was real money, even among this crowd. It was enough to fund treatment for dozens of burn victims, enough to change lives. Thomas had taken Veronica's worst moment and offered her a path toward redemption, but one that required her to genuinely sacrifice and contribute something meaningful. Veronica stood frozen, her mind clearly racing. Pride warred with survival instinct across her features. To apologize publicly, to admit she was wrong in front of all these people, to hand over that amount of money, it would hurt. It would be humiliating. But the alternative was complete social exile, becoming a cautionary tale whispered about at future gatherings. Everyone waited, the tension stretched so tight it felt like the air itself might snap. Seconds turned into a minute, then 2. Finally, Veronica's shoulders sagged. Tears began streaming down her face, smearing her carefully applied makeup. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, choked with emotion. "I'm sorry," she said. Then louder, "I'm so sorry. You're right, all of it. I've been horrible, jealous and bitter and cruel. Isabel never did anything to me except be kind, and I hated her for it because she had what I wanted, and I couldn't stand it." The admission seemed to break something in her. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing openly now. "I'll make the donation. I'll sign whatever papers you need. Just please. I can't bear everyone knowing how awful I've been." It wasn't the most gracious apology, still tinged with self-concern, but it was real, raw, human. Thomas nodded to his legal team, who somehow already had documents prepared. They must have anticipated this exact scenario. Within minutes, Veronica was signing papers at a side table, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. The donation was officially pledged, legally binding, witnessed by dozens of people. Security then quietly escorted her toward the exit. As she walked through the silent crowd, some guests looked away, others stared openly. It was the walk of shame to end all walks of shame, and every step seemed to age her years. After she was gone, The tent remained in stunned silence until Thomas walked to the center of the space and addressed his guests. "I want everyone to understand something," he said, his voice finally showing some emotion. "What just happened wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating Veronica, though she did that to herself. It was about showing that love means protecting what matters without becoming cruel ourselves. Isabel taught me that. She's shown me that real strength isn't about destroying people who hurt you. It's about maintaining your character even when others lose theirs." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "That $500,000 will help burn victims receive treatment they desperately need. People who are suffering through no fault of their own will have their lives improved because of what happened here today. Isabel would never want someone's cruelty toward her to be met with equal cruelty. She'd want something good to come from it. So that's what we're doing." As if on cue, Isabel returned. She had been treated by the medical staff, her burns thankfully not as severe as they first appeared. The coffee had been hot but not quite boiling, and her immediate screaming had brought help within seconds. Her face showed some redness but would heal without scarring, and somehow, impossibly, she had changed into a second wedding dress. This one simpler but equally beautiful. Thomas had planned for everything, including the possibility of the first dress being damaged. It was the kind of thoughtful preparation that defined who he was. When Isabel saw him standing in the center of their reception, surrounded by their guests, she smiled. That same warm, genuine smile that had captured his heart 2 years ago. She walked to him, took his hands, and kissed him softly, while 300 people erupted into applause. The celebration continued with a depth of meaning it hadn't possessed before. The orchestra played their first dance, and as Thomas held Isabel close, swaying to the music, he whispered loud enough for the nearest guest to hear, "You're the strongest person I've ever met. I love you more than anything in this world." Isabel's response was equally public. "You just showed everyone here what real power looks like. It's not about money or influence, it's about character. That's why I married you." The story spread far beyond that tent. Within hours, it was trending on every social media platform. But the viral moment wasn't the coffee attack or the drama. It was Thomas's response. The way he had turned a moment of cruelty into lasting good. The way he had offered redemption instead of revenge. Think pieces were written. TED Talk speakers referenced it. The incident became a case study in conflict resolution programs. The charity received the full donation within a week, and it sparked something larger. Other donors, inspired by the story, began contributing. Within months, the Burn Victims Foundation had received over $3 million in additional funding. Isabel and Thomas launched a larger initiative, using their resources and the attention from the wedding incident to create lasting change. Dozens of people received life-changing treatment because of what had started as one woman's jealous attack. Veronica disappeared from public life for nearly a year. She entered therapy, genuinely working through the bitterness and entitlement that had consumed her. Eventually, she reached out to Isabel privately, offering a more sincere apology without the audience or pressure. Isabel, being who she was, accepted it with grace. She even met with Veronica for coffee, though presumably neither of them ordered anything hot. The lesson from that day rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. Thomas Hartford had shown that true power isn't about revenge or destruction. It's about maintaining your character when others lose theirs. It's about protecting what you love without becoming what you hate. And sometimes the most devastating response to cruelty isn't matching it with equal force. Sometimes it's responding with such dignity and purpose that you transform the very nature of the conflict itself. What would you have done in Thomas's position? Would you have handled it with the same grace, or would you have reacted differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you or taught you something about handling conflict with dignity, smash that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more incredible true stories that remind us of the power of character over revenge. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.